Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am here with my favorite capitalist of all time, Mr. Kudwy, Assistant Director at Aporia Institute. How are you, Kudwy?
Doing fine. How about yourself?
I'm okay. I'm okay. A little bit of an awkward beginning and recording, but thanks to you, I think I have a good system going now. Hope to do it more in the future.
Okay.
So, before we talk about gender and what is a woman and all that stuff, you said there's two things you've changed your mind on. Like that, I want to start with that. What is it?
Well, firstly, there are some major things and then there are some minor things. The first major thing that I have changed my mind on is originally coming into politics and philosophy. I was pro life. Then I eventually became enlightened to objectivism and the philosophic application to the question of whether or not abortion is a right. And I've concluded that abortion is a right. And I've completely changed my arguments, and I oftentimes debate abortion a lot. Secondarily, the other thing that I changed my mind on, I would say this is a kind of a minor thing, but originally I kind of had the typical conservative view of gender, and then I completely eradicated the concept altogether
Mm.
cons- because I didn't at the time find that gender was a rational or valid concept. Then here recently, probably like about 2 or 3 days ago, I've been thinking about the concept of gender over the course of around 8 weeks. One of my colleagues from Aporia has been probing my brain on the validity of whether or not gender should be, or the concept of gender should be eradicated or eliminated from cognitive use altogether. And so I've been thinking about that in the past 8 to 9 weeks, and I've concluded quite recently that gender is a valid concept and it does have cognitive use. And yeah,
Right. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, and also links to Aporia and all his stuff will be in the description of this video. Uh, so okay, let's get to gender now. I hope this goes without saying, but you agree that when it comes to any, you know, transgender surgeries, it should only be done until the person turned 18, right? How do you feel about that?
yeah, I definitely think that we need a universal age to decide when a person is by default rational enough in order to make their decisions without the guidance of a guardian.
Mm.
And so I think that the age should definitely be 18 or somewhere around there for a person to make such a large decision in their lives.
Okay. I'm glad you said around there because yeah, as things change, uh, some countries have it at 16, some at 21, and you don't have a definitive answer on it, right? Like when it comes to that stuff, whether it's 18, 16, 21, 25.
The minimum that I will go is 18.
Okay.
Now, there in America, there are cases that exist in which you could actually undermine the legal system and attempt to prove that you do have of a rational caliber. And if you really wanted to, you could essentially bypass your parents being a legal guardian of yourself. So you can be 16 and 17 and bypass that in the court system. That is something that exists today.
Right.
But of course,
Eman-
you would have to prove that in court.
right. Emancipated minor, right? Is that the case you're talking about?
I'm not entirely too sure about the exact legal terminology that what I'm talking about, but I
Mm.
know that system operates and works today.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And then, what about when it comes to puberty blockers? Now, this one gets obviously all of this is controversial, and we all agree. Like, if you believe you were born in the wrong body, like obviously, that is a very difficult life you have. But I should have actually prefaced this at the beginning and said, okay, guys, we're just discussing things. We're not lawmakers or anything. We're just discussing these things. So tell me, puberty blockers, should it be banned? Should it not be banned? parental
Well,
permission.
what do you mean? What do you mean by banned? Do you mean banned entirely, indefinitely?
Yeah. So like, should minors be allowed to take puberty blockers, like 10-year-olds,
No, in reference to minors, no.
even
But
if the
like
parents?
yeah, yeah. I don't I as of now I
uh,
do not. Well, this is something that's something I don't research. For those who do not know, I typically specialize in American history, Reconstruction period. So this is I rarely delve into social issues, but as my current position, I don't think that puberty blocker should be something that is solely dependent on the guardianship of the parent. I think that this is outside of the jurisdiction of being a parent, and it
mm,
should be something that can only apply once the person in question reaches of legal age, which is 18 or whatever age around there. But in America, as of right now, it would be 18.
well, okay, no, puberty blockers usually happens before puberty starts. So by the time you're 18, the
Oh,
puberty is
oh,
over.
well, yeah, that was, I didn't fully. Well, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, I don't, yeah, but that makes sense.
Mm,
So I mean, I mean, I don't think the fact that because puberty blockers are specialized in stopping puberty, which
mm.
occurs roughly between the ages of 9 and 13, therefore that somehow changes my position.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. And you know what? Speaking of the founding fathers, do you think? Well, actually, yeah. What do you think they would have done when it comes to parental rights? Because I know you live in Florida, and there was a whole parental rights bill. What do you think they would? I don't want to chime in my thing. I think the founding fathers would agree with parental rights bill, but you tell me because you know more than I do.
That's a very hard question to answer without committing the fallacy of mind reading, which
Right.
is essentially
Yeah.
being able to extract their philosophy and what they applied their philosophy to, and be able to extract that and then proceed to apply it to something that they couldn't even fathom at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And so
Good point.
there is plausibility in which yes, they preached about freedom and individual rights, and then let us suggest that we could revive them and introduce them to this whole new social issue of puberty blockers, et cetera, et cetera. There is
Mm,
plausibility that they could compromise on those principles, and we've already seen this with the institution of slavery. Like they have compromised on the principles of absolute freedom and individual rights. So who is to say that they won't
mm.
or will compromise on those same exact principles when it comes to minors, parental rights, and puberty blockers? So I think it's a very difficult answer to ask, if not impossible,
Right.
or
No, fair.
different question to answer, if not impossible.
I understand. I understand. Okay. Okay. What about? Again, I don't want you to perform any mind reading or anything, but wouldn't you agree that when it comes to abortion, they would agree with a state by state cases thing? Or no? You again, you have no idea what they would have thought.
Depends. So we have the age old classic feud between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. There's
Mm,
a multitude of books that's written about this. It's just essentially federalism versus statism.
mm,
Do states have essentially jurisdiction within their own little geographic area, and then have a right to self government, or does the federal government have a right to establish a universal law that unites them all together? And so
mm,
again, I think if you ask the Federalist, what's your position on abortion and whether they're pro life or pro choice, I
right.
think the Federalist would say, well, this is either a fundamental issues of individual rights concerning the unborn, or this is a fundamental issue of concerning the individual rights of the woman. And whatever
Mm,
side that they side on,
mm.
they will be attempting to make a universal law, either respecting the pseudo rights of the unborn or the real rights of the woman.
Okay, fine. Where would you stand on this then? Are you more on the state when it comes to abortion, state rights or you know universal?
Oh, I am a Federalist. I do not believe I do not believe in the idea that the states have a right to deviate from the federal government.
Interesting. And is your stance the same when it comes to puberty blockers and surgeries and all that? You're just pure, all of it.
Anything that concerns individual rights and the violation of thereof, the federal government has absolute power when it comes to protecting individual rights. And so if the federal government recognizes the rights of the women who are pregnant and finally realizes that the unborn do not have rights and it's impossible for them to have rights, they
Right.
have an absolute right to establish a law essentially saying that any attempt for the state to establish limitations on the access of abortion or any limitations for a woman to get an abortion in any type of way, they would be subject to treason because they are under the jurisdiction of the federal government
Mm.
and they are actively trying to violate the rights of the citizens.
Oh, okay. Is there anything you would give to the states besides, building public roads or whatever? Is there anything that's considered? Even that you don't agree with roads?
Well, no, I don't agree with public roads or anything. The government should only be confined to police, military, and a court system. But in reference to the question, sure, a state could vote on who are their representatives. A state could vote on where to build the next courthouse, where to place the new police station. Essentially, anything that deals with the procedures, well, not the fundamental procedures, but essentially the secondary procedures of how they carry out whatever governmental processes that they engage in
Mhm.
and essentially the establishment of federal buildings. That's essentially
Wow.
the two things that they
Yeah.
can do. Of course, there's more, but I mean, I'm not into political science. I'm not into the realm of government like that to have clear cut examples of what else could the states do that is detached from the federal government. But as long as it doesn't concern the concept of individual rights, they can literally do whatever the hell they want.
Wow, fascinating. Okay. Uh, I don't want to put words in your mouth. But would you call yourself more on the left or the right, or just capitalist? How would you describe yourself?
I personally I don't think that the distinction between the left and the right is a rational one. I think it boils down to either collectivism and individualism. And I would just essentially call myself primarily an individualist and as a byproduct, the capitalist. And by capitalism, I mean laissez faire, total separation
Understood.
between state and economics.
Oh, okay. No, fair enough. And in fact, I would love to show you after this live stream, uh, this little project I'm working on about my spectrum. And what I have is capitalism is in the middle, and then the far right and far left both become collectivists. So if anything, I would say capitalists are not on the right or left. They're actually just they're the most pure radical centrists, I would say.
I think that's a step in the right direction.
Mm.
The
Mm.
the right and the left, as especially today, are just variants of collectivism.
Yeah.
You have fascism, communism, Nazism, socialism, democratic socialism, whatever label that you want to go and put
Yeah.
on it. One, it's not capitalism, and because it's not capitalism, it automatically, by necessity, means that it is some variant of collectivism because capitalism requires the principle of individualism.
Right. No, I get that. And this is something you and I definitely disagree on. I think the right, actually, no, I hope you agree with me. The right is more individualist than the left is, but that's maybe because the left has just pushed so far that the right looks, more rational. But I guess for you, they're both crazy. No?
So I'm personally against the right more than I am against the left.
Oh, I hate when you say that, but
The
yeah, go ahead.
the reason being is because sure, the right in words might say that we're pro capitalism
Mm,
or pro constitutionalism and we're
mm,
pro America, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
But if we're talking about the grand scheme of things and talking about the overall fight,
mm,
the side that is committing more injustice is the side that's misrepresenting the correct stance. So if you have a
mm,
side that's saying, I'm for capitalism, and then in
mm,
fact you are not for capitalism, or saying, I'm for American principles in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and in fact you are not for those things, that's where the greatest amount of injustice is actually being committed because you're continuously misrepresenting the appropriate stance. And
mm.
now the other side, the enemies of who you're going against, is now going to think that, oh, what they're doing and all of this and stuff like that, that's what capitalism is, or that's what America represents. And in fact, it's like, no, that's not what those things are. And the fact that they continuously say that this is America, this is capitalism, I find
Mhm.
it very problematic. And so it makes the battle for actual capitalism, for people who are actually for America and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, it makes those people who actually care about those things, it makes the battle harder for us, because not only do we have to come in the picture and fight the leftists and the essentially America haters, but we
Mhm.
also have to
Yep.
step in and correct the people who are saying that they are for America when in fact that they are not.
Ooh, that's a deep statement. Okay. Uh, I strongly disagree. I think the left has gone is crazier, but I do actually understand your side better now. Um, because I mean, my issue with the left, and I I don't know who said this. I think it was some guy named Getz said. He said like when Trump lies, he lies. Oh yeah, I have the biggest penis in the world. That lie is easily like disprovable. But when the left lies, they attack the whole concept of reality. You know what I mean? The left lies about like just basic notion. There's people who can't define what is a woman nowadays. That is insane to me. Speaking of which, what is a woman?
A woman is a grown adult female
Oh, okay.
human being.
I mean, I 100% agree with that. But do you have any idea why the left can't just say that? Why are they so afraid to just say, yeah, adult, human, female? What's so hard?
So again, I particularly don't specialize. Well, for me to have a full encompassing answer to that, I would have to understand the history behind of how we got here today.
Okay, sure.
But the as far as I know, long story short, the left, or essentially society as a whole, abandoned religious principles or religious like philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And now they replaced religion with humanity and
Mm-hmm.
subjectivism and nihilism and so on and so forth. So they're ultimately for not reality, but they're ultimately for the progression of humanity by our own subjective standards. And so if anyone's watching this and you actually go to college, I mean, it doesn't take long for you to sit there and listen to a professor that says, yeah, everything's a social construct or everything's a social convention. One of the two. They say
Yeah.
that right off the bat, and I've experienced this. And so when nothing is no longer predicated on reality, because ultimately they don't think that they can escape inherent or intrinsic human bias in order to observe reality objectively as it really is. They think that they're only biased in their views and perception and conclusions by the fact that they're a human being. So instead of looking at reality and instead of using reality as a guide to live our human lives, we're human, and so we're going to utilize our own human nature as a progression and whatnot. And so
Mm-hmm.
if people come out and say, well, I feel like I'm in the wrong body, or if people come out and say, I feel like changing my gender today,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing in reality that's going to suggest it's no, you're wrong, you can't do that. Well, I mean, considering the fact that reality is nothing and
Mm-hmm.
humanity is all there is, you have to accept that premise. They feel like a woman, they're a man, but they feel like a woman, and now they want to transition. And gender is this fluid idea of whatever you want it to be. Because again, everything is a social convention, everything's a social construct. There's
I mean,
nothing that defines it in reality. And so
sure.
that's essentially the overarching kind of general understanding of how we got here today historically.
Mm.
But the exact details, I'm oblivious to it because I don't. This is not my
No,
topic. But
I
yeah, go
mean,
on.
I mean, you're gonna study history, right? So hopefully they touch something on that. Uh, maybe all this started because we gave women the right to vote. What a big mistake that was. Um, I'm half joking. I'm half joking. Uh, do you see yourself as becoming president in 20 years from now? Because I could actually see that. Or you don't even want to.
As of now, I don't personally see myself wanting to be a president
Mm.
or being a president.
Sorry, what? A
I
president or a
I
president
wanting to be one
or being one?
or
Okay,
being one.
okay.
I don't see myself being
I'm,
a
uh,
president. I think a
mhm,
person like me at this high of a caliber at the age that I am,
of course.
I think it would be very dangerous for me to even think about running for presidency because I would people will get exposed very fast.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
There's not much to elaborate on. I
Okay.
mean, I mean, obviously from the background. I mean, that's not even all my books. I got half of my books in a crate because I'm packing up and going to college. But I got all these books behind me. I read a lot. I study a lot,
Me too. Yeah.
hours upon end, and so I have a reservoir of knowledge to pull from, historically, philosophically, politically. Been debating for several years, and this I'm still in my teenage years,
Of course.
and so me being 30, 40, doing the same exact stuff, increasing my knowledge, getting a wider and more integrated and denser view of the world, I'm dangerous.
Right. No, I get that. Okay. Sorry. How old are you again? Because I thought you were 20.
19.
Oh wow. No. See, you're generally one of the smartest, if not the smartest 19-year-old I've ever met. And what's funny about you is I know you don't call yourself left wing or right wing, but I could totally see in 20 years from now you being the the head of the Democrats. Now, why I say Democrats is because I think the Democrats are really crazy. Actually, most left wingers of the Western world is crazy. But you understand. So again, Democrats tend to be more for federal rights versus state rights. You seem to also be like that. You also seem to be very pro-choice. Again, typical left-wing view. You seem to be very pro, you know, uh, individual rights. And I think it was Ayn Rand who said, the individual is the biggest minority or the most important minority or something like that.
The
The quote of
smallest
the
minority is the individual.
right, the small minority. So okay, so clearly you care about minority rights, and I'm like, yeah, this is you actually understand the left better and better than they understand themselves because you seem to be again very pro-choice, pro-federal rights, and pro the individual rights, and this is something the left used to stand for. And yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know, 20, 30 years from now, I could totally see you because your positions seem that way.
I would disagree that those are views that the left used to stand for. I mean, looking at the trajectory of American history, the Democrats pre 20th century was all about racism, keeping slavery alive, et cetera, et cetera. Then we enter the 20th century, and there's not even a break. There's not even a small piece of the Democratic Party for even temporarily. I was like, yeah, we're for individualism and we're for upholding the Constitution. No, they immediately go into progressive policies, expanding the welfare, expanding the government, and then it happens in the 60s. And so I don't even think there was a brief second in which the Democratic Party was even resembles a sliver of what I believe. Now, as opposed to the right or the Republicans as of right now, we have, I mean, not correctly, but we have Republicans generally being a champion of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Republican Party proposing the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Republican Party proposing the Civil Rights Act of 1875, the
Mm.
Republican Party continuing incorrectly again and with failure the Reconstruction era of America. And then the Republicans leave that in towards the 1900s. But but to answer the general question, if I were to ever run,
Mm.
I think it fundamentally depends on the trajectory of the parties in the next 20 to 30 years. But
Mm.
if Republicans are still essentially if Republicans are still getting shit as they are today, and the Democrats are still being highly glamorized as they are today, despite their horrific views, I think there is much room for me to be a Democrat. I think there's much room for me to be a Democrat. That's something that resembles Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, that's why exactly. Yeah. Now the funny thing is that's pretty much what I was saying. The only thing I would push back on you on was I'm talking about from the '60s onwards. It's generally the Democrats that are pro federal rights, and then the Republicans more pro state rights. That's like the general trend. That's why you seem more of a federalist. Sorry, is federalist the one for the federal? or no, federal is the one for the states, right? The
Federalism
words.
is the one for the federal government.
Okay, you seem like a federalist.
Well, I said that I was a federalist.
I mean, you did. Sorry, yeah, you did it. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't. I mean, I guess you can say that. The Yeah, I guess you can say that. That's something I didn't really think about.
Hmm.
That the left is actually in a way they're trying to target more universal policies,
Hmm.
while the people on the right is leave it up to the states.
Yeah. I mean, literally look at what happened with Trump's judges and Roe v. Wade. Trump's picks, because don't get me, Trump could have easily picked three judges that would have been for uh, federalizing pro-life on all the states, forcing every single state to do it. But that's not what he did. He picked judges that ended up just devolving the abortion rights, so every state can have its own abortion policies. So it ended up being more of a state, because you gotta admit it could have been so much worse. It could have been like judges that are going to force every state to be pro-life, but that's not what happened.
I don't know if that's entirely the case.
Hmm.
The whole entire abortion fight is twofold. Is that one, you would have to overturn Roe v. Wade, which there's no direct way out of it. You would have to overturn it, and automatically it's going to be up to the states because it's no longer a federal issue. And
Right?
then the
Okay.
second fold would be essentially establishing a new federal policy that universally limits the access to abortion. And I don't think that they could commit it twice in one go. They couldn't commit it both at one go. And I think they want to,
Hmm.
but I'm not entirely sure.
I don't think so. I really don't think. But I don't want to make this all about abortion. Uh, but we could explore that in future. But I just let the record know I don't think we're going to have a forced pro-life on all 50 states.
If there
Uh,
is a
hmm,
pro-life Republican majority in Congress
hmm.
with the Supreme Court, I could probably guarantee you that they will definitely try to generate some type of universal pro-life law that is in all 50 states.
I I I highly doubt, because a lot of Republicans are more on the pro-choice side. Like, even if you look at the states, the majority of the states are still, they're not like 9 month pro-choice, but they're still like, first trimester pro-choice. There's only like 6 states that banned it altogether.
Well, that's precisely why I said limit in some. I didn't say completely ban it. I said limit.
Limit. Okay, limit. Sorry. Okay.
I think the Republican Party is starting to loosening up a little bit in comparison to the 80s. But again,
Interesting.
depends who you're talking to. Their limitations is quite strict.
Interesting. Okay. And speaking of which, if you were a lawyer, which amendment? Actually, you know what? This one I could save it for later. I'm going to send you a DM. This is the first 10 amendments. And Roe v. Wade, I believe they used the 14th Amendment in order to pass this thing. And if you look at the first 10, wouldn't you agree there's something else they could have used in order to universally pass pro choice laws for the whole country?
I believe it was the Ninth Amendment,
Yep.
if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah, no, no. We could, yeah, no, we could save
So
this for a more lawyer. Unless you have something to say right now, but we can save this for a different day.
so it's been a minute since I last went over and memorized a lot of the amendments. But the first one, and first and foremost, I would immediately go to the 14th Amendment. The reason being is because it explicitly states all persons born or naturalized. And so, one, the obvious no-brainer one is all persons born, which means that you have to be a born individual, and it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you're literally living and sustaining yourself inside of someone else's body.
Right.
But then it says persons, and so then it comes to a conversation of what is a person. Of course, there's some people out here that try to make some type of magical scientific definition of person. You have to have consciousness and sentience and so on and so forth. But what they forget is that the only reason why the concept of person has entered the science realm and they're trying to make a scientific definition of the concept of person is because the concept of person was originally political. And
Yeah,
so
3/5 compromise. Is that what
they
you're referring?
no. Well,
Because
I
I'm
mean
saying
that's
the
that's
definition of a
something that
person. Yeah.
yeah, that goes into something. But
Mm,
the concept of person was originally political, and so to completely ignore the historical and political context that gives rise or makes person inside of politics, to
mm,
completely ignore that context and then try to steal the word person and try to inject it into the field of science and try to come with a sciencey definition for it and then re-enter it into politics and be like abortion should be banned. I think that's a heavily fallacious. And so if we
mm.
understand the concept of person in its rightful historical and political context in America, we are referring to born people. We are referring to what people do and interact with other individuals. And this is precisely something the unborn cannot do.
Yeah.
And so considering the historical context and the exact meaning of the Constitution, no, the unborn, they're not persons.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you, but I'm just if I put on my conservative hat, usually conservatives refer to like it's like we in this country have a dangerous history with defining what a person is. That's why I'm pro life. And first of all, I don't like everybody referring to everything as slavery and the Holocaust, but like that's usually what they go for. They're like, okay, we remember when the last time we defined person, we said blacks are only 3/5 of a person. What would you say to someone like that? Because I mean, an unborn fetus versus a black person, for lack of better
Well,
term.
Well, firstly, the my whole explanation of the relevance of the concept person and the abortion debate, I think that is a very secondary, a very last point to make. That's not even my essential. But to respond to somebody who says that, again, I refer to the failures of Black Americans during the 1800s when they were trying to get their natural rights recognized.
Mm,
The primary failure was that they were not battling on the premise that they have natural rights and the government's obligation is to recognize those natural rights. What they tried to do is get that recognized through a medium. And that medium was, well, first, as Black Americans, we must be recognized as citizenship or citizens or legal, lawful people of the state. And
mm,
therefore, our natural rights could be recognized. And so that's the failure. They didn't go essential enough. They didn't say,
yeah,
"I have natural rights," period, and your job as the government is to recognize it. They
right.
they kind of I wouldn't say compromise because that means that you're aware of that you are compromising, but
Yeah,
they didn't realize that they didn't go fundamental enough, and so they settled for citizenship as a gateway to getting their natural rights recognized. And the same thing
yeah.
is kind of applying here.
Mm,
Personhood, how to define person, blah blah blah, in the legal sphere in reference to abortion does not matter. What should matter is the concept of individual rights.
Amen.
The government shouldn't be predicated on protecting people. It should be predicated on protecting individual rights, period.
Amen.
And so, if that's the case, then if we're going to analyze the instance of abortion, we recognize that women do have rights. And of course, I mean, there's a lot of reasoning behind the statement, but my position is that the unborn do not and cannot have rights. And so
Mhm.
it is the states, or much rather by state, I mean literally the whole entire government system.
Yeah,
It is the government's obligation to protect the individual rights of the woman. And it's not protect her rights over the unborn because the unborn there's no over the unborn do not have rights, period.
okay. Fair answer. I like that answer. So when it comes to abortion, you would be described as very, very uh, far left. Even though again, it's not really a far left because you believe in the individual rights, not in this right versus left. Good. Let's get to the final and the scariest part of this whole video is what is a man, what is a woman, all that. You already said a woman is an adult human female. Now, and I'm guessing you would say a man is an adult human male, right? And then the idea of the age where people can get surgeries, you say generally 18. Uh, generally speaking, yeah, good. Now, uh, what is feminine? What is femininity? Or you could use Ayn Rand's definition. What is that?
So, femininity, the essential character in Ayn Rand's understanding, the essential characteristic of femininity, or the essence of it, is
Mm,
essentially hero worship. Now,
mm,
of course, I could explain this concept and I can use her words and I can kind of grasp at or attempt to grasp at what she's trying to explain here.
mm,
But as of now, I am not in full agreement with Ayn Rand's kind of this is Harry Benzwinger's words, but
mm.
he said hopelessly traditional, I believe. He said hopelessly traditional in this sense,
Yeah.
where it's that the in a relationship or
Mm,
not in a relationship of like romantic love, but just the relationship between the dynamics of male and or man and woman,
mm,
that the man is the hero here. The man is the embodiment of hard, concretized, solid, stern values and principles. And the woman is also can have an embodiment of strong and stern principles,
mm,
but how she expresses it is completely different from the man. And the man will
mm.
express his principles through, I don't know, action or commitment or uh, I don't know, go to war or something like that. I don't know
Right.
exactly what objectivists would say in reference to this, but a
Right.
woman would express her value for those exact same things, but not by doing the things that the man would do. Essentially, she would be a hero worshiper. And so I think a lot of people get confused and say that, well, this is just woman sacrifice, and the woman is sacrificing herself to her. Ayn Rand would kind of respond is like, well, no, there's not sacrifice going on here. In fact, it would be in the woman's self interest to be a hero worship, to have a hero to worship. And worship is not supposed to be understood in some type of sacrificial religious way. By worship, it just means that whatever you're worshiping is deserving of praise, and you recognize the value that's built into the object of being worshipped. And so
Mm.
there's not supposed to be any negative connotation to that. But pe-
It
people would
does.
suggest that a woman needs something to worship, an embodiment of certain values that she cares about, and
Mm,
essentially giving that object or thing, that person, praise. It would be in her self interest. Now, perhaps I'm not explaining it to the best of my ability. There's other objectivists and other philosophers who have been studying Ayn Rand's philosophy for way longer than I've been alive. And
mm.
so they definitely have a better insight on this. But this is kind of my general understanding of it. And the more I read into it, the more I just question where Rand has this idea. Now,
Well,
I
I
can
mean,
answer this question. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, we could definitely, we don't have to answer all these questions now. Like, the idea of women, man, this is almost like a question as old as time. Like, this goes with history, philosophy, science, everything, because it's a deep question. And I don't mind if we talk about this again, in a couple weeks, if not a couple months from now, and touch back on this. Because in terms of yin yang, you've heard of the yin yang philosophy of, Taoism. Even they believe the man is I believe what the structure and the woman is the pusher or something like that. So there is something where the man leads, the woman follows. Like there's so many different philosophies have the same idea, and in fact, evolutionarily, women are the ones deciding everything about us. Like the woman decides who to mate with, and it's that trait that continues. Woman decides she wants tall, dark, handsome. Okay, so they we have more people that are tall, dark, handsome. You know what I mean? Like they decide everything that our bloodline goes, and
Yeah,
then
this is something that Rand identifies in her philosophy of sex.
mm,
And she talks about the anatomical and biological facts that are important when it comes to the sex between the male and the woman. The male is the penetrator, and the
mm,
woman is the receiver.
mm,
And so, in reference to what you're saying, that the woman is the ultimate decider in the picture,
literally,
th- she's ultimately correct. The woman in a relationship, especially when it comes to having offspring, she is the door. You have to, as a man, you have to figure out a way to open that door
yeah,
and go into the other side, which is essentially producing offspring.
yeah. I mean, literally. And speaking of locks and doors, have you heard the expression? If a key can open many locks, that's a very cool key. But if a lock can be opened by so many doors, that's a pretty shitty lock. Have you heard that? kind of a subtle way of describing something about men getting laid and women getting laid. Listen, it's funny, but I genuinely, honest to God, I believe that. I genuinely believe, like, if my friend gets laid a lot, I'm like, nice job, bro, nice job. But if a woman, I'm like, dude, ew, why are you like, you know, whoring yourself? How do you feel about them?
What's what's very what's very complicated about that example is it misses that example is materialistic, and so it misses the essential thing that's present in a relationship, the emotional and intellectual relationship. That's
Of
something a
course,
key cannot resemble.
of course,
It's an item.
of course.
And so for me personally, what's it doesn't necessarily matter the number. It's more so what's her personal philosophy and how what is she using to evaluate other people? I think that's what matters. And so I think high caliber men exist all around us. I of course in a minority, but like it's not rare that you walk the streets and you just can't find one. I'm pretty sure there's high caliber men that are semi rational and are worth having sex with, but
Mhm.
that physical interaction alone doesn't really mean anything. It's more so, what's the evaluative process that the woman engaged in order to come to that conclusion. It's like, yeah, this is a cool guy to have sex with.
Okay, wait. So you want to get married one day, right?
Yep,
Okay. Would you marry a woman whose uh, naked body is all over the internet? Like she's a porn star.
absolutely not.
Okay. So not an OnlyFans model or a porn star or anything like that. What about a stripper?
No, no, same thing.
Same thing.
So it's
Okay.
the same thing, just in person.
Right. No, because obviously less people have seen a stripper naked, but OnlyFans models are everywhere. Um, so why not? Why would you marry a woman? I mean, I agree with you. I would never marry a woman who's. I would have sex with a woman who's been on OnlyFans, but I would never marry one. Why not?
Well, it's twofold. I think anything concerning sex and sexual expression is something that should be sacred. And by sacred, I do not mean in a religious connotation. By sacred, I just ultimately mean it's important and worth upholding. But in that reference, it's sacred. It should be something that's private and something that's special between the two people involved. Sex is essentially, well, let me put it this way: rational sex is essentially the embodiment of physical, material, and intellectual values. When you are engaging in sex, you are celebrating your material values, which means your philosophy of beauty. What do you look for in another person? Their face structure, their nose, or their body shape, et cetera, et cetera. So it is an embodiment of your philosophy of beauty.
That
Secondarily,
ass. Yeah.
or the other aspect, or the other aspect, other side of the coin, would be their intellectual values, who they are as a person, what they value. Would I have sex with a communist and actually enjoy it? Probably not. I'll be turned off very quickly. But
Interesting. Okay, that's okay. Wow.
so rational sex is an embodiment of those two. And so because it's like that, it should be, again, upheld sacred. It shouldn't be flaunted around willy-nilly, etc. So I think that's one aspect in why, like, OnlyFans and strippers, I wouldn't be so inclined to marry them or even talk to them or have a relationship with them. But the other aspect of it is, again, I think being an OnlyFans model or a stripper is kind of an implicit self admission that you cannot be able to produce a rational value for yourself to make it.
Wow. Wow. Okay, it's so funny because you're not religious, right? You're atheist,
Mhm.
but you. It's so funny because you don't sound religious, but you have pretty much the same view as religious people in a way, you know. Uh, Except you came to it in a very logical and yeah, logical and objective conclusion. Because everything you said is 100% correct. Like I don't disagree with that at all. But it's so funny because religious people would say, "Oh, because she doesn't believe her body is sacred," blah blah blah. But you literally came up with a logical way that yes, she doesn't believe her body is sacred. It's so fascinating that I mean, I don't think you'll ever actually. I don't know. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if 10 years from now you become Christian. You're probably going to say no. You're never going to become Christian. But I don't. You're pretty much you're explaining Christianity better than Christians can. Even though again you're not a Christian. Like I'm just saying, you're not. But you're 100% correct. Like wow, wow. No, you are wow, and you are right. That's fascinating. Now, before we you touched about you would never have sex with a communist? Really? Not even for fun? Because I hate communists, but I would. I would
Well, the conversation was surrounding
love and
rational sex,
okay, okay.
yeah, and romantic love. So I would not. It for me personally, it's impossible for me to have a romantic love relationship with a person who's politically a communist and allows communist principles and philosophy to essentially plague the rest of her life.
Wow. I mean, you know what? That is a really good point because I do feel about feminists uh, the same thing. Feminists tend to end up like it's so funny because I remember these very attractive feminists when I was in university, and then 5 years later, I went on their Facebook, and they've become oh god, they're very overweight now. They have so much scars and tattoos. Like oh my god, you're right, definitely. I think people's I think people's ideology can definitely cause harm in their life. Now, would you say the same about just people who are like generally liberal and conservative, like not far left or far right, just generals? You would you're okay with them, right?
Ep I think it's a combination. I think it's if you're a generalist, that's fine,
Hmm.
but I think of the other side of the coin that's also going to determine whether or not I'm going to be attracted to you and willing to engage in a relationship with you
Hmm.
is is how are you receptive to ideas? How are you receptive to conversation about politics, philosophy, so on and so forth? I think that's another important aspect of it.
Right. Right. Okay, that makes sense. You want kids?
Huh?
You want to have kids one day?
Oh yeah.
Well, this is going to be fun. How are you going to raise? Are you going to raise your daughters and sons differently? If you have a daughter and a son, are you going to raise them the same?
In fundamentals the same, but considering that gender does play a role largely in psychology and just overall development, you can't essentially raise the daughter one way and copy and paste and do the exact same thing to the son. Obviously, they would have to be treated different in many different regards. So now, what's the exact nature of that? I don't know. I have an damn. I didn't think about it that way. I have about a decade left before I actually plan to actually have children. And
Mm,
so I think as I approach my typical age that I want to have children, which is around late 20s, early 30s,
me too.
I want to I want to start reading about parenting. I want to kind of get a general understanding of kid development. I want my kids to be the smartest. I'm not going to give them little I mean, stuffed animals are fine, but like little pointless toys. I want to give them toys that are tailored and designed to making their brain work. Montessori toys. So
Oh, okay. Now, if your son, if your 14-year-old son comes home and tells you he banged a sexy senior, would you high five him and say nice job, son? That's my boy.
I have I have no idea
Okay,
actually.
okay. I genuinely would, but I'm curious how you would because I'm obviously more religious than you are, and you're definitely not. So I'm curious rationally what you would you're gonna praise him for bagging that hottie, as you kids say nowadays. Anyway, uh,
Most likely, I would probably tell them that that wasn't rational, but
really,
um,
really, okay,
yeah.
okay. Uh, well, this was actually really fun. We're nearing the 1 hour mark. We have 11 minutes left. Um, do you think everything I asked you when it comes to uh, gender, sex, abortions, all that, do you think your mind is going to change about these in the next 10 years?
Perhaps the things surrounding like puberty blockers and transgenderism and parental rights, perhaps that.
Hmm.
But outside of that, uh, I'm an intransigent atheist. I don't won't be changing my position on that. I won't be changing my position on abortion,
Fair.
and I won't be changing my position on federalism.
Yeah. Fair. Actually, before I forget, how would you define sex versus gender? Because I forgot to ask that.
Well, sex, whether it's the chromosomes or whether it's the gametes, one of the or I frankly don't care because I'm not a scientist, but
Fair
one of
enough.
the or whatever is the essential genetic component that causes the two distinguishing sexes,
Mhm.
that's sex. It's just purely biological. The fact that throughout the entirety of all organisms that there is two categories. You have essentially who has reproductive system A and reproductive system B. That's sex. That's universal between all organisms. And
Mhm.
then you have gender, which
Mhm.
strictly applies in the context of human beings. So, for an example, this is something that my colleague told me, but he said, "Hey, that male over there just hit me." Your question is, and of course, in human colloquial terms, you're gonna be like, okay, you're automatically going to be assuming like male as in human being, dude, like a guy.
Of course.
But like, if we're talking about like the actual definitive understanding of concepts,
Mhm.
the a person would be like, male what? A male dog, a male snake,
Yeah, I would.
a
I
male
would.
cat,
I would be
and
completely. Yeah.
so gender not only includes the sex of the organism in question, but it also includes the development stage of a human being. And so now it becomes more clear when I say, hey, that boy over there hit me. Now we're talking about a young human male
Yeah.
and versus that man over there, which is an adult human male,
Of
versus
course.
a girl versus a woman. So
Correct.
the gender essentially combines the fact that we need a cognitive necessity in like genetics and being able to distinguish between two different reproductive systems and how they interact with one another. But there's
Yeah.
also a cognitive necessity
Mhm.
in reference to human beings specifically because we don't live with bears, we don't live with penguins and cats and
Of
stuff
course.
like that. We generally and primarily live with other human beings. And so there is a cognitive, especially in social affairs, there is a cognitive necessity to have boy and girl and man and woman when we're referring to each other.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. So, would it be correct for you to say that you don't believe there's such thing as gender when it comes to animals, dolphins, monkeys, anything? We just use sex with them, right?
No.
Exactly. Okay, that's what. Is there such thing as non-binary people? I mean, there are people on TikTok who say they're non-binary, but how do you feel about those people?
Like neither,
Sorry, what do you mean by neither?
like neither man or woman.
Yeah, you haven't seen people on TikTok saying I'm a non-binary
I I
Z-Zen?
yeah, I I
I'm
would
serious.
yeah, I've seen those videos.
Okay.
I would say that's impossible because again, gender refers to essentially the developmental stage of a human being who is of one of the two sexes,
Right.
not this kind of arbitrary subjective expression. That's not what gender is. Gender does not refer to how you express yourself. You could still be a man and be quite frankly act like a woman. That's fine.
Of course.
But that's the wording here. You can be a man and act like a woman, but that doesn't make you a woman because gender is not expression. Gender refers to the objective fact that one, you are of one of the two sexes, and two, you are in the developmental stage, whatever developmental stage that you are in of that sex. So you could be a boy, which essentially refers to pre puberty, or maybe a little
Of
bit after puberty, because not
Right.
all people who hit puberty are really man.
Of course.
Now, where the lines are, it doesn't really matter, but we know for a fact that there is a man and then there is a boy. And so
Okay. What do you say to people who are born intersex? They have both female and male genitalia. There are people like
I
that.
don't
They have a penis and
well
breasts.
genitalia, I think it goes ultimately to the actual reproductive systems, would it not? I don't really inquire
I
about intersex people,
okay. I have the answer
but
to that, but I wanted to know what you were thinking. And
well, I
yeah,
mean, again, even with intersex people, it's quite often clear that they are one sex over the other. And so Again, this is kind of saying like this is kind of like saying, "Oh, you really don't know what the definition of a cat is, or you can't really universally define a cat because you can't define a cat as a four-legged animal with fur and blah 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 whatever because there's cats
Just
out there that
dog.
were born with three legs." And it's like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
well, when we're defining a concept, we're defining the default position or the default status of this thing. And so the default status of human beings is that we're either born in one of the two categories. It's either you have male genitalia and a reproductive system, or you have a female genitalia and a reproductive system. And so there are anomalies that fall in the middle, but they either side. You could typically tell they either side on one of the two.
Exactly. Now, okay, if you had a friend who had a beard and long, beautiful blonde hair, and they told you to refer to them by Zizem, first of all, would you be friends with that person in the first place? And second of all, would you actually refer to them as Zizem? Just
I think it's a extremely complicated question to answer.
no, no, it's just in your personal life. Like personally, if your friends want to say, "Hey, can you call me she her?" If I tell you I'm your friend, are we friends? If I tell you to call me she her, would you call me she her?
I would I would say no.
Oh,
And so
okay.
I think ultimately the larger question here that's being surrounded is ultimately the issue of self-esteem. If people who are trying to identify as something other than what they think they are or what they are, and people are not willing to conform to kind of these terms that they set for themselves,
Mhm,
and they want to act in a particular way. Well, you're not really respecting me, and blah blah blah. Blah. I can't believe you've done this, and I'm going to
mhm,
make this a big issue. I think that
mhm,
ultimately doesn't come down to the fact that the person is not respecting the terms that you set for yourself, but ultimately
mhm.
comes down to the fact that you just have low self esteem.
Wow, that's wow, that's pretty profound, and I think you might be right. Yeah. Uh, Now, obviously, I know you're very pro free speech, so obviously you're against the government legislating it. But I'm saying in general, would you? What if your friend genuinely was born in the wrong body and they're getting the trans surgery and all that stuff? Would you then refer to them by their preferred pronoun? Just as a sign of respect. Not this is not a government legislation. Just friends.
So I don't I'll put it this way. I don't know if the concept of being born in the wrong or right body is valid. I'm not entirely sure, and
Ooh,
so
okay.
I'm agnostic on that position, whether that's a real scenario, and then if it is a real scenario, what is the process of determining that it's real? How do we evaluate that? Because
Interesting.
there's three different phases. Because it's three different phases. It's how do you distinguish from me right now? I'm a guy. I'm a dude. I've loved women. How do I distinguish between me right now saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm born in the wrong body," versus people who are in the middle of an influential period or a phase in their life, right? And they later grow out of it, versus people who are genuinely like trapped in the wrong body. How do we distinguish between those three categories?
Right. I mean, I genuinely, honest. I believe this is one of the biggest issues of at least the 2020s, if not the 21st century, because well, okay, I don't want to say 21st century, but definitely in the 2020s, because a lot of Western countries are currently, because listen, generally speaking, the left and the right don't super disagree on like Russia, like they both generally hate Russia, China, blah blah blah. But when it comes to transgenderism and children, minors' rights, parental rights, this is something people are very disagreement. Uh, because this is something that, yeah, it is a difficult question, and at the end of the day, I think someone like you can answer this because at least you understand the concept of rights. So even if you admit right now you don't know, how do I distinguish between I'm a girl, I'm a boy, I'm a girl? At least you agree we should protect individual rights, meaning don't make them ruin their body until they turn 18. Then they can do whatever they want with their body. Would that be correct to say?
Yeah, like if people want to rightfully or mistakenly so ruin their life by getting such medicine or surgery when they're 18,
Right.
then fine, they have every right to do so. The government's not here to legislate morality. In fact, if it does that, it would undermine the whole concept of morality and make morality impossible.
Mhm.
But it is supposed to respect and respect and ensure the conditions respect and ensure the conditions to make morality possible, which means that your individual rights are being protected and that you have freedom of choice.
Amen. Amen to that. Freedom of choice. And well, speaking of choice, if what if a 15-year-old went to a doctor, asked for surgery, the doctor performed the surgery? What punishment do you think would best suit that doctor who did it behind
Doctors
the
going to
parent?
jail.
Oh, so not just
Doctors going to jail.
revoke medical license, just doctor. No,
Oh,
well, both
well,
obviously
like,
revoke
yeah,
medical license and goes. Yeah.
yeah, then it's two in the same. Yeah, he would definitely go to jail for
Mhm.
malpractice,
Mhm.
and he would essentially violate the rights of the parents.
Amen. Okay, rights of the parents. Is there a place where the rights of the parents uh overstep and the rights of the individual? Like, should parents be allowed to beat their kids? Which is what I was getting at. Or should the government take away the kids?
You said parents beat their kids.
Yeah, I'm saying should they be allowed? Because you said rights of the parents. I'm like, let's expand on that. Do parents have a right to beat their kids?
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think I would have to say that I'm agnostic on that as well.
Mm. Okay.
I it's a very because there's the yeah, it's a very interesting one. So perhaps to other objectivists and other people who are objectivists, maybe the answer to them is so blatant and it's like, dude, what are you talking about? How can you be agnostic on this? It's like I don't know. I haven't heard any arguments for nor against it, and I haven't frankly put thought into it. So being agnostic as of currently, I think that is the thing to do.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you for doing this with me. And I hope to do another follow up in the near or far future. Where can people find you? Where do you want people to follow you?
Well, I have various platforms. Everyone can just click the link tree in the description, and you should be able to have access to all my various platforms. I'm starting a Substack. Also, in that link tree, I have a heading that's called resources you can check out. Quite literally, pretty much all the books that I either have read or just own in general and skimmed a little bit. Back there, I have a section on American history, which I'm continuously building as of today, and I have a whole completed section on civil rights history since that's something I specialize in. If you that's something that interests you, you can go ahead and do that. And lastly, of course, I'm gonna have my Cash App at the bottom, so I could definitely stop being a broke college student.
Okay, thank you so much, man. All right, have a good one. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to do more of these with somebody else next week. And could we again? I will force him to do another one in the future.